Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions Postdoctoral Fellowship 2026 Overview. The webinar is brought to you by EURAXESS Australia and New Zealand, and it's wonderful to see such strong interest from researchers, not only in Australia and New Zealand, but also from 59 other countries across the globe. So it's really a pleasure having you with us today. Please allow me to introduce our esteemed guest speakers for today. First of all, we have with us Ms. Cristina Gómez Corchete, who is the project coordinator for EURAXESS Worldwide, and interestingly, she is the former Marie Curie NCP for Spain. And Cristina will provide an overview of the MSCA Postdoctoral Fellowship 2026 call, including the key aspects of who can apply, where, what, when, and how. Also, we have with us Dr. Madeline Taylor, who is a senior lecturer in fashion at the School of Design from Queensland University of Technology. And Madeline will share her personal experience on why she applied for the postdoctoral fellowship and how she approached the application process. Many thanks to both of you, Cristina and Madeline, for joining us today. And I'm Nishant Sanjila, EURAXESS Worldwide Country Representative for Australia and New Zealand. For those who are joining us for the first time, EURAXESS is an initiative of the European Commission that addresses barriers to the mobility of researchers and enhances scientific collaboration between Europe and the rest of the world. We provide free information about European research funding, research careers, international collaboration opportunities, and networking possibilities. As all of you are joining us online today, I'd encourage all of you to please follow EURAXESS Australia and New Zealand on LinkedIn, X, Facebook, or YouTube to stay updated on our future opportunities, webinars, or any sort of funding-related news. Now, before we begin, just a few quick housekeeping points. I'd encourage all participants to please use the Q&A function, not the chat function, to submit any questions you may have during the presentations. We will address as many, hopefully all the questions during the Q&A session following the presentations. Please also note that the session is being recorded, and the recording and presentation slides will be shared afterwards. However, the recording will not include the live Q&A discussion. So I strongly encourage you to stay until the end if you would like to hear responses to many of the common questions applicants tend to have. I'll pass the presenter privileges to Cristina. You are in very good hands, everyone, because Cristina is really an expert on this. Cristina, over to you.
And you can see the screen. So thank you very much, Nishan, for the possibility to be here with you today. It's my pleasure, my honor. As Nishan mentioned, I'm the EURAXESS Worldwide Coordinator, but I've had the privilege to be a national contact point for Spain for over 10 years in my previous job. So the presentation that I'm sharing with you today is actually based on Spanish NCP's presentations and also on research executive agency slides. And it intends to give you an overview and a general introduction to what MSCA Postdoctoral Fellowship is about, knowing that there's going to be a second webinar at the end of this month to give you more information on how to submit a proposal, evaluation criteria, and more practical tips. So we are celebrating with this first slide, actually, the 30 years of MSCA funding research. So I think it's a very interesting year as well to know a little bit more about, obviously, the scientific, the person who was behind the words and the naming of these actions, but also the program itself. So let's start. My idea is to give you a general introduction of what MSCA is about and also to get you familiar with the terminology, because I think this is very important when you try to apply to the calls, to understand not only the philosophy, but also the terminology. We go through the different features of this 2026 call, including all the eligibility conditions. I'm going to share with you also some statistics on previous calls, and some of them are actually quite new to me as well, interesting, so that you can see a little bit of the different scientific panels, how they're funded, and also just a basic overview on how the proposal is structured and the evaluation criteria, together with the useful resources that you need to be aware of. So I think I don't have to introduce you to the Horizon Europe program. I guess you know a lot about it. So this is the European Commission Research and Innovation Funding Program. over 95.5 million euros. And what we're talking about today is Pillar 1, which is excellent science. This is where the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions are located, in this pillar that it tends to attract and retain talent, not only in Europe, but beyond Europe, throughout the world. The funding for MSCA, that this is the acronym that we use, is 6.6 billion euros, spent throughout the period of 2021 to 2027. So what is MSCA about? It is the most well-known program regarding research and training. And the idea is to support researchers throughout the full stage of their career. Meaning we are talking today about postdoctoral fellowship, but you need to know that this program funds predoctoral, doctoral candidates, postdoctoral candidates, but also staff working in R&I in the different action calls that are funded. Then we are talking about excellent science, and we're talking about bottom-up approach. This means that the different research and scientific ideas are welcome here. We will see, obviously, there is an order that you need to send your proposal to, but the idea is that you as a researcher and you as an institution will be able to prepare and decide what kind of project you wish to submit to the European Commission. Obviously, there's an order, and obviously, this bottom-up program is aligned with very important EU initiatives, the Green Deal, among many others. When we talk about mobility, in MSCA, we always mention the triple dimension, the international mobility, because you will see that you need to move from one country to another to develop your project, the interdisciplinary mobility, because obviously we are living in a world where we need to put resources together, and this is the idea to so that different disciplines can work together to really confront the different challenges that we have to confront. And then lately, also the intersectoral mobility, because again, it's very important to try to have the world of the academia and the non-academia working together for a better valorization of the scientific results. This is a program that really looks at the researchers and try to have them working in the better conditions, in the possible better conditions. So it really is attractive in terms of working and employment conditions. It has an impact not only at the individual level, obviously you will be improving your scientific background and your skills, but also at the institutional level, because it will allow the institution to really structure internally how to deal with human resources and mobility, and this is very important. And obviously it will have an impact on the R&I system in the scientific field that you are covering. When we talk about bottom-up, as I mentioned, it's absolutely open to all research fields, including Euratom, fusion and fission science, but you need to address your project to a specific panel. So there are 8 different panels where you can submit it. Multidisciplinarity is taken into account when submitting it with different scientific key descriptors. So you can choose the chemistry, social sciences and humanities, economic science, information science and engineering, environmental and geosciences, life sciences, mathematics, or physics to submit your proposal to. These projects are fully funded. You will see that when I talk about finances, they're 100% unit cost based and fully funded. And this is very interesting as well. So some terminology from my side, because what you need to know is that it's not the researchers who receives the funding, it's the institution who will host and recruit the researchers who receives the funding. Therefore, we will differentiate between institutions based in European member states or Horizon Europe associated countries. Those will be named as beneficiaries in the projects, and they will receive the funding. Then you see there the names of the different EU member states, but also the associated country to the program, to Horizon Europe. There are fully associated countries, to the full program, and also associated countries to Pillar 2, for example, the case of New Zealand. The countries that are not either associated or EU member states are called third countries. They will be the case, for example, from Australia. So third countries or non-associated countries. And this is important in terms of terminology, because again, the countries that are based in EU associated countries or member states are beneficiaries. And those will be the one who recruit the researchers and receive the fund to carry out the research and the project activity. Then what we call associated partners are the rest of the institutions who can participate in a postdoctoral fellowship program, but are based somewhere else, anywhere in the world. And they can contribute by hosting a secondment, and we will come to this terminology as well during the presentation. So by hosting a secondment in their premises, or by being, for example, the hosting institution of the global fellowship in the outgoing phase. There's no funds receiving by the European Commission, but obviously there will be a bilateral agreement with the beneficiary in the program and in the project. What else? We mentioned at the beginning the triple dimension for mobility. So we can differentiate here the academia and the non-academia sector. So when we talk about academic sector, we talk about public or private higher institutions that can award degrees, public or private non-profit research organization, as well as international European research organizations. And then the rest of possible institutions falls into the non-academic sector. And this is the idea that any researchers can also carry out his or her career in any other socioeconomic actor, be that an NGO, an SME, a hospital, a public administration, a museum, etc., etc. So these institutions can also be part of the project, some of them being beneficiary, which is not the normal or the usual way to enroll, but mainly being hosting secondments or also hosting what we call non-academic placements in Europe at the end of the project. And we will explain this when we now explain the features of the 2026 call. So Nishan already gave you a hint on when the project will close. That's the 9th of 2026, so the 9th of September. And this date is very important because it's also the deadline when we measure all the eligibility criteria. The funding, you saw that 399.05 million euros. And here what you have also is an indicating timeline on how it works, meaning once the project, the deadline is there, then the projects are evaluated and the first grant agreement signatures will only take place around the month of April 2027. This means that you have not only until April, but you can start a little bit later, as you can see, until September 2028. And I think this is also important for you in your planning, because some people sometimes don't apply because they feel that they still have a year and a half in their current project, but this is feasible to start the fellowship a little bit late. So regarding the indicative budget, you also have this split of the funding. And you see that mainly all the funding goes to the European Fellowship that we will explain right now, but there's also a small budget, well, the small 60 million is not small, budget for the Global Fellowship. What are the novelties for this program regarding 2025? Although I understand that many of you are not that familiar with it, what has increased, and this is a very good point here, the living allowance, meaning the remuneration that the researcher will receive, has increased this year up to 6,350, but we will explain how this works. And also the country coefficient corrections have also been increased and updated. Well, not increased, updated, because they vary from country to country to adapt to the level of life. Then there's also resubmissions restrictions that were already there but have been updated this year. And it means that if you have applied for this fellowship last year, you need to have received at least 80% as a score to be able to resubmit. Then importantly as well, the secondments, this is kind of European Commission jargon that allows you to spend some time of your research project outside of your beneficiary, that is called a secondment, has now also been enlarged and allows you to be outside of your institution for 50% of the duration of the project. And this is also interesting. So when we talk about the postdoctoral call, you need to know that you have two possibilities as a researcher to present a project. But you need to choose one of them. You cannot choose and select and present two. So you need to go for either a European fellowship, And this allows you to carry out your research in Europe within an EU member state or an associated countries for between 12 to 24 months. Okay, so you can be based anywhere in the world and want to move to Europe, to a concrete institution in Europe to develop your research projects. Then we have the global fellowship, and this structure is slightly different. You will start your project somewhere outside of Europe in what we call an outgoing phase for a period of 1 to 2 years, and you will finalize the project in Europe. In a return phase where the beneficiary will host you back to transfer, for you to be able to transfer the knowledge that you have acquired in your outgoing phase outside of Europe. We will go into detail into the criteria of the two type of implementation. So when I mentioned the resubmission restriction before, you need to know exactly that you need to have scored at least 80% last year, and a resubmission is consisting of the same project with the same researcher and the same institution. This is also important to be able to know. So widely, the MSCA fellowships are known as postdoctoral fellowships, but you need to know that within Europe, there's a number of countries are called or defined as widening countries, meaning they are not really performing that well in Horizon Europe as they should be, maybe because structural or internal or national R&I ecosystems are being a little bit different. So they get a support from the European Commission, from this Horizon Europe program. And a way to support them is to give like a second chance to excellence research project that could not be funded by MSCA. So if your destination is one of the widening countries, and now I realize I have not included in the list, but I will send the updated presentation to Nishan so that you can see the list of the countries that are called widening. You just, when applying, you need to say yes at the submission stage. That allows you to get this second chance being a NERA fellow. Then I also mentioned at the beginning that some of the modalities in terms of fusion and fusion energy are also funded as part of the Euratom program, but through the MSCA fellowships. I'm not going to be talking too much about this, but if there is somebody interested in that domain, then we can bilaterally inform you a little bit more about the topic, the content, and how it works. Now, how it works, how does this fellowship works. So as we mentioned, you will have a beneficiary who is the institution based in Europe who will receive the funding and who will recruit you as a researcher. Okay, and then independently, if that institution is a university, a research center, or if it's a company or an NGO or a hospital. So both can be beneficiary. Then we have an associated partner, not always available or not always applicable to the project, but you can have an associated partner where you do a secondment or a placement, or obviously if you go in for a global fellowship, you will have an associated partner hosting you in the outgoing phase outside of Europe. Then we have here mentioned researchers in plural, and you might say, why are we talking about researchers in plural? Well, you, the researcher, as we have the example today, you will be developing your own idea, presenting the project so that an institution can recruit you within this MSCA Postdoctoral Fellowship, but at that institution, you will be somebody supporting you. And that is the role of the supervisor within that host institution, within that beneficiary, and also the associated partner, if applicable. So that will be a mentor for you in the institution, but you will be the researcher who create the project and who has the idea and develop this project. Important, this is something administrative, but it is important because it could make the project not eligible. For the global fellowship, the associated countries based outside of Europe need to provide a letter of commitment to show the Commission that they are involved and how they are involved in the program. So, for example, if we have a global project with an outgoing phase in Australia and return phase, for example, in Spain, the institution in Australia needs to provide a letter of commitment within the submission system to make the project eligible. So what about the eligibility of the researchers? We know now what are the beneficiaries, the associated partners, meaning the institutions who work in the project. And now when it comes to researchers, possibly a vast majority of people who are listening to us, you need to know that this is a postdoctoral fellowship. So the title already gives you the information that it is for researchers who already got their PhD, who have defended their thesis before the call deadline, but who have a maximum of 8 years of research experience. We will come to that now in a minute. Then you have to also comply with, well, basically three rules, three eligibility criteria. The research experience that we will define now in a minute. The nationality, it's open to all nationality, but there is some sort of restrictions in the global fellowship that can be, of course, removed if depending on the residence of the fellow who is applying. And then the mobility rule. Obviously, we are talking about a research, training, and mobility program, so you will need to comply with those three rules measured, as I mentioned at the beginning, at the call deadline, meaning the 9th of September. So when we talk about research experience, if you want to apply to this postdoctoral fellowship, you cannot have more than 8 years of research experience. This is not a restriction on age, it's a restriction on scientific research experience. Therefore, for example, you can be outside of research for a year. This year will not be counted as research experience. There are several exceptions. You have them listed in the slide: paternity, maternity leave, compulsory national services when it applies, etc., etc. So I think this is important, okay? If you have doubts, the Commission is already giving you the instruments for you to be able to identify if you can make it or not, and you have guidelines and self-assessment tools available in the Funded Intenders portal. This is a website that I'm going to mention a little bit later in my presentation. So let's start with the European Fellowship. So the European Fellowship, you want to pursue your research career in Europe between 1 to 2 years. And it's open to all nationality. Wherever you are, you need to comply with the mobility rule in the country that you want to apply with. For example, again, I mentioned Spain. This is where I'm coming from. So if you want to apply for a European Fellowship in Spain, you cannot have resided or carried out your study in Spain for more than a year in the last 3 years prior to the call deadline. Then you can do secondments and you can do non-academic placement. I have a full slide on that because the terminology can be similar, but it differs and there's a strong difference in what a secondment can be, and you can carry out anywhere in the world, and a possible extension of your project if you decide to go for a non-academic placement, meaning working in industry in Europe. Then we will talk about the global fellowships now. And here, as I mentioned, the structure is a little bit different. So you will start your project outside of Europe in a third country for 1 to 2 years, and then you will finalize your project in Europe, in the beneficiary that is recruiting you for the full period of the project. Here, this type of global fellowship is open to researchers that are nationals from Europe, European member state or associated countries, or long-term residents in Europe as well. Meaning, if your case, you have resided in Europe in 1 or 2 or more European countries for a consecutive period of 5 years, you're also eligible to apply for this modality of the postdoctoral fellowships. Again, the research experience is the same. There's no variation there. The mobility rule in this case applies to the country where you start your project in. Meaning, if you want to do a global fellowship in Australia, you cannot have resided in Australia for more than 1 year in the last 3 years previous to the call deadline. Okay, again, secondments apply and non-academic placements in Europe also apply. How does a postdoctoral fellowship work? Because we talk about research training and career development, but it's not only a research project, and this is important. This is about excellent science, of course. So you will improve your scientific skills in the lab, but you will also be working on developing complementary skills, transferable skills. This means that apart being an excellent scientist, you will also work on different aspects, such as, for example, open science, entrepreneurial skills, how to get public funding, how does IP, intellectual property, work, many other aspects that will really add value to your research career and to your research path. It is very important in this project to get right something that is called the knowledge exchange or the knowledge transfer. You as a researcher will be going to an institution, and there needs to be a knowledge transfer between you as a researchers and the institution, your supervisor and the host institution. So this is very important, this match and this complementarity between your profile as a researcher and the institution that you're going to. What is the institution bringing to you, and what are you bringing to the institution as a researcher? Now, when we talk about a common approach, you might say, but this is an individual project, and it is, but it is important that there's a link between you who are applying as a researcher and has the idea, and the supervisor who also has an active role in not only in the project when implemented, but also when preparing the proposal for specific parts of it. Then we mentioned that, so depending on the modes, you can have 1 to 2 years in Europe as a European fellowship, and you can have 2 to 3 years for global fellowship. But you need to know that within those projects, you can also carry out secondment. What is a secondment? Secondment is the possibility for you to do a research stay outside of the institution that you have been applying with, in a different university, a different company maybe, that will allow you to enhance this triple international, intersectorial, interdisciplinary dimension of the project. So this secondment will impact the results that you will achieve. You can do it at any time during the project in a European fellowship, when you are in your outgoing phase of your global fellowships, and you can split, if needed, these secondments within the project. And it can be done anywhere in the world. This is very important, and this is what I mentioned at the beginning, that the standard duration has been increased now to the half of the project. Then when we talk about non-academic placement, we need to differentiate this, because the non-academic placements can only take place at the end of the project. So if you have a 2 years fellowship in Europe, you can extend it for 6 months if the idea for you is to really maybe pursue your career path outside of academia, and you think you can exploit your research results and do this in a more non-academic setup. So meaning in, again, company, an NGO, a hospital, public institutions. So that this is at the end of the fellowship, and it can take place in Europe, okay? Here, you will have, in both cases, also supervisor at the institution that is hosting your secondment or that is hosting your non-academic placements. To finalize with the information of the call, unit cost and funding. This is very important. Just an example based on Spain, again, because this is that, the presentation is coming from my ex-colleagues in Spain. So this is the way it works. We talk about unit cost, meaning you have to calculate the number of months where you will, that you will have your project for. So 24 months, 12 more, 36. And you have a living allowance, that is the remuneration that you will get, that you can see that there's a country coefficient correction for different countries. Spain is 94.2, but there are different countries with their different correction coefficients to allow the fellowship to adapt to the level of life. There are deductions here, employer and employees, you need to take that into account. And living allowance and mobility allowance are always there in your remuneration. If you have family obligation or family situation, you will also be entitled to a family allowance. And there are also specific needs allowance for researchers with disabilities that is not included there. So this is for the researcher, and it will go to you as a researcher per month. And then for the institutions, it's also important to know that the institution gets funds for all that has to do with your research, training, lab secondments, training, performance, participation, organization of events, etc., 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 and also the management and indirect costs. So as you can see, fully funded and well funded. Very quickly, because I think I'm almost only 5 minutes left to that half an hour. What is important about these previous results? And as you will get the information, I won't take too much time. But postdoctoral fellowship has always been the most popular call within Horizon Europe right now and within Horizon 2020, the previous framework program. So what you can see there are the numbers of proposals submitted, and you can see a huge rise from 2024 to 2025 with almost 17 proposals eligible receipts. And then you see the number of proposals that have been funded out of this full number of eligible proposals, meaning it is a very popular and a very competitive call. What I'm showing here is the cutoff score, meaning the minimum that you need to obtain out of 100 to be funded. And this is not done to discourage you, but reality is that it is a very competitive program. But we have Dr. Madeleine is here, and she will show you that this is possible and how to make this possible. So you see that depending on the panel that you're choosing, depending on your scientific panel, you will have different cutoff scores for the European Fellowship and for the global fellowships. And this is just for you to have an idea, breakdown in different panels, the number of projects that are funded per panel, meaning, for example, in many cases, the life sciences, the engineering, but also the social sciences, social and humanities receive a lot of projects, and therefore a lot of projects are funded. But there was a strong decrease in numbers of success rate from 2024 to 2025 due to the high increase in number of proposals submitted. For you to have an idea in terms of country results for the European fellowships, don't have information on the global, and that's a pity. But concerning the countries that receive more projects in Europe, you have the UK, who's always been leading when they were associated countries, when they were EU member states and not associated country, followed by Spain and Italy very closely. In terms of modality as well, for countries who receive also the Global Fellowship and European Fellowship. But what is interesting for me is this information by panel. So these will also give you, maybe if you still don't have your host institution and you're willing to pursue a European Fellowship, the breakdown of projects received by panel, by scientific panel in the different countries. And this is the grant agreement preparation, meaning the researchers who have been invited to prepare their projects by nationality. And I think I saw Australia somewhere there with around 20 nationals from Australia. Then very quickly, and I will finalize with this. If you need to remember one website from this presentation, apart from, of course, from the EURAXESS Australia website, this is the portal, the fund and tender portal. This is where all the calls, not only for Horizon Europe, for other European programs, are included. And this is the direct link for the call that is open already and that you can go visit, have a look at all the information that is there available for you, all the documents that are very strategic that you need to consult to be able to prepare your project. What is the project? What does it look like? You always have a part B that is more administrative in terms of the institution who participate, the budget, information on ethics, securities, and then you have the technical part, what we call part B1 and part B2. And these 10 pages that you see there that are evaluated against the criteria of excellence, impact, and implementations, this is the time and the page limit that you have to convince the European Commission that your project needs to be funded because it's the best one to be funded. When we talk about excellence, what is your project about? What are your objectives and how are you going to fulfill them that you know will make a difference? And I won't go into details again because you have a second webinar for that. And obviously the impact is, why are you doing this? What is the added value and how are you going to collect the information? How are you going to measure the results to show this impact in many ways? And the implementation is just how this is going to be done, meaning you will receive some resources and you have to prove to the Commission that you can manage a project on your own. So this, for the second webinar, just to give you a hint, are the specific sub-criteria of excellence, impact, and implementation that you will be asked to write when you write your proposal. And let me finish by sharing some useful websites. So the first one is obviously the EU Funding Tenders portal. Then when it comes to resources, I always mention the Radiance project because it's really useful. There are national contact points in many of the countries, in most of the countries that participate in Horizon Europe. And there's a project to enhance their capabilities to give you, even researchers and institutions, a better service. This project, Radiance, offers a lot of useful documentation, tools, handbooks to prepare your proposal. And of course, if you're looking for information, you have EURAXESS Australia and New Zealand that delivers a lot of informative sessions. These are some of the key documents that you might want to visit if you're already interested, that are very important when you draft your proposal. If at this stage you still have not defined who you want to do your project with or where you want to go, the website to visit is EURAXESS Jobs. You will find, and this is a screenshot from last night, over 700 hosting offers from institutions who are willing to apply with researchers worldwide, and now is the time to do so. And with this, sorry, maybe I took a little bit more than 30 minutes, 3 minutes more. Sorry, Nishan. I encourage you to prepare your proposal. I used to normally finish my presentation with a different quote from our dear Marie Skłodowska-Curie, but this is the new one, a very nice one. Thank you for your time, and I hope, I gave you some ideas on how to, if you're eligible, you're not eligible, and how to prepare a PF.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Cristina. I didn't want to interrupt you because I think it was really everything that everyone needed to hear from you on this particular topic. So you will see that there are a lot of questions that have come in. So of course, we will look at them. For all those who are joining, please be aware that Cristina has been alluding to a follow-up webinar. So there will be a webinar on application advice. So that's why you might have seen that Cristina did not go into details, because it's on purpose. On May 28th, this is when we will bring the application advice webinar for those who are going to respond to that particular call with a proposal. We will go into much details, and we will also have an evaluator who will come and give you some advice, tips, and tricks on this. So on those parts, of course, we will look at them, but keep your questions coming in because I think these are very important. I think with that, we move on to a slightly different kind of interference from Dr. Madeline Taylor. Madeline is a successful fellow. I need to tell you that in 2024, when we were organizing this particular webinar, Madeline had just received the news that she was successful with the postdoctoral fellowship proposal. She had not undertaken a fellowship then. But now she has already finished her postdoctoral fellowship in Finland, and that's why I invited her again, because now I need to see how her experience with all this went, why she applied, how she applied, what was her experience. So I think it's a very important thing to hear from a successful fellow herself. Madeline, the floor is all yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nishan. I'm just sharing my screen. I realized I will do it this way rather than that way. So realistically, I applied because I knew that the Marie Curie Fellowship would be, fellowship would be an amazing career opportunity for me. I knew that it was going to firstly give me a really fantastic international profile, and as well as a kind of really a bigger profile also inside my institution, because it's so prestigious. Though I have to say it's probably not as well known in Australia as it probably is across Europe. So I had to do a little bit of marketing within my institution for what the kind of the competitiveness and the value of that of this fellowship scheme is. But it once kind of people understood it, they really got how exciting it was. So when I decided to apply, I wanted to apply because I wanted to have an international fellowship experience. I wanted to expand my networks. I also knew that costume is not really a thing that's funded, or even fashion research is not really a thing that's funded in Australia. So kind of taking advantage of that international market where there is so much more kind of respect for culture and society research, I think, that occurs in the EU. And I also was planning to travel with my family. So we kind of were also looking to kind of go when we're looking to what I was going to apply for was kind of where would we go as a family was also a factor. So I was kind of trying to go somewhere where my kids could go to school and we could have a relatively smooth transition as a family. So that was also a factor in my application. And specifically this project, which I did, which was called Technological Innovations in Costume Practice, and it was looking at how costume practitioners in industry are applying new digital technologies such as 3D printing and digital pattern making into their workflow and the kind of implications of that adoption. Was kind of combining some of my previous experience with as a costume with my new developing experience with digital tools in the fashion field. And also I was really interested in specifically developing skills in co-design. So I knew, and from my own experience, looking at my kind of capacity, I knew that working with industry really intimidated me. And I knew that kind of taking my research outside of the academic field was something that I really wanted to develop my skills on. So when I was drafting my project, I was conscious that I not just wanted to kind of have a topic focus, but the methodology, I really was conscious about how that was going to develop my skills as a researcher. So I specifically put things that scared me into my project. So I put things like having workshops and doing consultations with industry, kind of putting out industry-focused resources as well as traditional research outputs, because I knew that those would push me in really interesting and exciting ways. So when I went to develop the proposal, Cristina talked about this a little bit, but one of the things I would say is because there's the 3 parts, you need to allow a lot of time for those. The part B1, I looked at my kind of, because I was working in Word, I could see that I had spent 120 hours in that document by the time I went to submit, which was like 3 weeks of full-time work that was spread over like a kind of 3 or 4 month period. So it takes a lot of time. And that was just the B1. That wasn't like any of the part A's or the part B2. So I just would say it takes a lot of time to put this application together. In terms of my trajectory, I was at a research conference in 2023. Yes. And I attended a talk, and there was a lot of costume people in the thing. It was about technology and theatre, and it was like the whole theatre, which was full of 500 people or so. I could see that there was a kind of frustration in the air about why costume wasn't being included in this conversation. And so the next morning I sat down with a mentor of mine who became my supervisor, and I said, I want to do the Marie Curie. I've got an idea. It's going to be about technology and costume. And she said, yes. And so that was how the project came about. And it was really great to have that narrative of like, I could see that this was a gap in the international field, and this is how the story. So that's the kind of the story of that project. And so I could refer to that. And fortunately for me, one of the project that I was referring to that had this large gap was also another EU funded project. So I could kind of talk about how there's EU wants to fund this work, but there's gaps in what EU is funding, the Research Council is funding for this area. And so this is the kind of narrative that I crafted, which was basically around the need for the project, that there was a lot of costumers who were looking to use these tools, but they weren't sure where to start. There was also a kind of industry discourse that discounted technology in this very gendered work, which is costume is very gendered, it's very female coded, which also is a kind of EU priority around gender equality. And also there's a kind of sustainability aspect in terms of the digital sampling. So I was kind of making sure I was hitting really key around digitization, around sustainability, around gender and equality. So I was hitting really key kind of EU concerns and those kind of research pillars. And then I talked about how the impact of that and then the state of the art. And so one of the things I would say, it's particularly coming from a kind of humanities and art space, is like the state of the art and the kind of scientific kind of things was fairly kind of new to me. Like I wouldn't have called my research scientific before I did this project. But now I kind of feel like I can claim that space. And so that's something that's kind of, as a term, that's kind of more common in Europe, I think, and potentially particularly in the these funding schemes. But really I could articulate that I was being state of the art because nobody was doing this research yet, but it was kind of like on the horizon. So in terms of narrative, it was the need, what my solution was, why I was the right person to do it, why my supervisor was the right person to supervise me, and then the kind of the training development for me and also for the host. Aalto University in Finland was my host university, and they have a really great reputation around digitization and technology and also creative practice. They have one of the best costume research groups in the world. So there was kind of the fit was really natural there. But I also could talk about what I'd done in the past and how that would be valuable for that partner. In terms of the B1, that big picture kind of 10-page document, really hitting those notes around excellence and impact and implementation and kind of making sure that I had a really clear research aim and objectives, and that was connected to these kind of ideas around work plans, tasks and milestones and deliverables. So really making sure I was using all of the terms that they talk about in the document, in the template. So this is something to kind of think about, is like how you break down your project and use these terms. So one of the things I would say is draft it in the MSCA template, which you can download and use their headings. Use bold to emphasize key bits, so the kind of the readers kind of don't skip over the kind of really key points. Use a lot of visuals and tables to break up your document. Use those terms, and also use numbered references to make sure your research and your supervisor's research is really visible, like we discovered, or talk about that in the text. In terms of the part B2, that's really your CV and your supervisor's CV, and I would kind of suggest using a personal statement at the start of it, so people who are reading it can kind of have a narrative understanding of all the stuff that you then present, and also refer to the Green Charter, which is like the kind of sustainability aspect as well. And then there's the part A, and I would say one of the things that I think that got me over the line in terms of getting a grant was I used part A very strategically. So, I talked about in the ethics section of that really detailed information about what I was going to do with my methodology, the fact that I'd referred to various documents and consulted with the Aalto Research Committee already about my ethics of my application. So I kind of made good use of that material, because you've got such a short amount of area to put your information in. You can kind of like be really strategic with where you put where you can kind of show you've done the work. And also I would suggest, because the part A is only on the portal, download it in their headings and then kind of work on the document and then move to the portal at the end, because you've got to go lots of feedback rounds with various people. And on that, I would say seek support. There's a lot of support for these programs. If you're working with a home institution, get support from them. Get people from your local mentors to read it, get people inside and outside of your field to read it. I got really great feedback from some professors who had nothing to do with my particular area of expertise, but were from various parts of Europe, so they kind of had a different expert thing. You can also get support often from your host institutions or your supervisor, and also potentially from the grant writers within the institutions, because they have a vested interest in getting you, over the line. And also I found a huge amount of support from places like Talk Academia and Facebook groups, EURAXESS as well, and other past recipients. And one thing I would say is I'm very happy, I did this for the 2024 presentation, but Jen will share my application, the B1 part, with you as part of that post information slides and stuff like that. So you'll get a copy of my application, because that was the most helpful thing. I had 2 colleagues' successful past applications, and it really helped me understand the formatting and the language. So if you have other kind of colleagues or networks that you can tap in for other versions, even if it's not in your field, like one of them was completely not in my field, but it was really helpful. I would say that my experience was absolutely incredible. This is just a few photos of various bits and bobs of my time. I really felt like I leveled up as a researcher. It gave me a big sense of empowerment and confidence, and it really did change how I think of myself as an international researcher. I did like something like 8 presentations nationally and across Europe during that period of time. I was only in Europe for 13 months. My project wasn't the full 24 months because just with family, we couldn't get away for much longer than that. But I interviewed with 30 people. I did workshops with 45 people from around the globe. I really focused on industry partnerships and had my first industry consultation kind of role during this point of time. And also I felt empowered through this to kind of like, I met someone at a conference, and 2 weeks later I was like, we should write a paper together on this topic, because all of a sudden I felt like I had been validated as a researcher, which was really, really interesting. I was also very self-directed. My supervisor was very supportive, but it was really my project. So that's just something to keep in mind. One thing I would say is I would have done differently is probably reached out beyond my research group to other people in Aalto before I went, to let them know that I was coming. Because when I arrived, I was emailing people, but I think would have been get off the ground a little quicker if I'd kind of gone and got in touch with other research groups or other researchers who I've been connected with, and also teed up presentations early, because quite often, there was one point where I was doing a presentation 2 months before I left about my project to a group that they were like, oh, we wish we would have known about your research earlier. So really kind of getting ahead of the game in terms of being able to share your ideas, even if they're still in development. And the other thing would have been allowing for cultural or institutional differences in ethics applications, which kind of caught me by surprise. So that my ethics took a little bit longer than I would have liked, which of course then delays the whole project. So prioritizing that would be another hot tip, I would say. But overall, such a wonderful experience personally and professionally. And I would highly, highly recommend it. Yeah. So that's my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madeline. I think we really wanted to hear how your experience went, and I see a lot of people have stuck to listen to you speaking about that. So thank you for joining us from different parts of the globe. And thank you, Cristina and Madeline, for your time and excellent presentations today. I'm sure our audience gained many valuable insights into the postdoctoral fellowship. Before we close, I would like to highlight that we have a dedicated webinar on application advice on 28th May. The session will focus specifically on guidelines and tips on preparing a strong and competitive proposal. So we encourage you to join us for that if you are interested in putting forward a proposal. The registration details communication will arrive to your emails in the near future. You will also receive the recording and slides of this webinar. So in that you will see emails for both our speakers. So if you want to touch base with them with questions, please feel free to do that. Of course, we are there to help. If there are questions that were left unanswered, we'll be happy to respond to them in writing. So do not hesitate to send your questions if we somehow did not manage to respond to them. I think when I'm coming to the end of the webinar, but when you exit the webinar, there are 2 short survey questions, and we would really appreciate if you could take a moment to complete them. It's just 2 questions. 5 seconds of your feedback will help us improve future sessions. Finally, please continue to keep an eye on the EURAXESS Australia and New Zealand social media platforms, because we acknowledge that we live in an information overload age. So we try to filter out just the information that is necessary for you to be aware of, whether it's be future webinars, funding opportunities, or any certain development from the European research and innovation landscape. And with that, this brings us to the end of today's sessions. And thank you very much for joining us from different parts. I wish you all a very good week ahead. And thank you very much.